Okay, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another really cool preview for you from a brand called NOTSAG. Basically, NOTSAG watches are a brand based out of Los Angeles, California, in the good old US of A. They were created back in 2018 by French-born Laurent Chardin Richmond. So essentially, NOTSAG is a antigram of Gaston, the founder's oldest son, who was born in 2010 with developmental challenges, including mitochondrial disease, severe autism, and a GABBR2 mutation. So the name, I think, might sound not like the most intuitive name for a watch company, but obviously the meaning behind it is actually quite powerful. Now, a little bit about them. This brand, basically, they're a modern micro-brand startup offering original, high-quality Swiss-made pieces in limited series, powered by very unique Swiss automatic movements. Now, the type of watch I consider this is a dive watch. Some key common characteristics and design language when you're looking for a dive watch. Of course, you're going to want water resistance through some type of screw-down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. Now, what we have here for you guys today are two early prototypes of the AquaElite Type 1 and Type 2. Essentially, they are modern Swiss-made divers, with the Type 1 being kind of the baseline, and the Type 2 adding a GMT subdial for travelers. Now, in terms of pricing, the Type 1, as configured here, is going to be $799, and then the Type 2 being $999, and that's with the black finish. It's actually like $100 less if you go with kind of the regular steel setup. Now, with all that said, let's zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, now if you guys know my channel, you know that I really like to review watches that I like. And I always do want to kind of put my best foot forward when it comes to reviewing watches, just because I know that the people behind these brands, you know, this is something that's very special to them, and it also is, you know, their livelihood in many cases. So I've had these in my possession for a little while now. I was kind of torn on whether or not to do the review, just because of the condition that the watches were kind of in. Mostly this one. Oh man, it's just, so go ahead, just before we jump too far into this, just forgive the condition, guys. But because of kind of the time that I've had these in hand and everything, I did want to kind of share them with you guys and you know, make this still an experience worthwhile. I do feel bad for the brand owner, just because whoever had them before me just didn't treat these with a lot of respect. So that's a bummer, but I did still want to review them because I do still like these watches. I like the concept, I like the design. And of course, if they were in cleaner condition, then I would much rather would have preferred to showcase them in that light, but just kind of due to the time restraints and everything, I am, you know, still going to share them with you guys. So, but just go ahead and keep that in mind, that yes, these are, you know, just pretty worn in terms of, you know, just wear and tear, and versus something I would typically, you know, feature on the channel, especially since it's, you know, not out of my personal collection. But I think these are really cool, and I think one of the crowning things about these watches is the fact that they use a very interesting movement there, guys. So we get the little Soprod action, which isn't the most popular Swiss-made movement, and it's definitely not the cheapest. You've seen these movements in very expensive watches, and even if you really want to get down and dirty into the architecture of them, kind of being shared with you know, some Seiko L calibers dating back to the 4L, but now more recently the 6L, the movements even on the Seiko side, right, apart from the Swiss-made Soprod side, are in very expensive watches. So the fact that you're getting these under $1,000 is pretty outstanding, and then you're even getting some nice little additional features and complications there. You can see at the 12 o'clock on both of them, you're going to get a power reserve indicator, and then you do get this nice little independent 24-hour subdial here on the Type 2 that is actually done controlled by here. You kind of just unscrew that, and then it's a pusher, and you can kind of set that, and it's really cool. So I dig that. I think that's a really cool feature from that standpoint. But basically, the AquaElite Type 1 and Type 2, hopefully I pronounced that right earlier. Yeah, these they're cool. They're definitely very interesting, very different. I like that they they have a familiar design aesthetic in terms of recognizable, I guess, numerals and font and just color combinations and their color palette, but they just have a different overall approach. It kind of reminds me a lot of kind of a young Christopher Ward in terms of, and then their life cycle. I mean, of course, but here using much more complex movements and premium materials, got it kind of right off the bat. In terms of the dims on here, we got a 42 millimeter diameter with a 13.4 millimeter thickness, 49 millimeters lug to lug, of course 316L stainless steel, in a brushed and polished finish. Nothing too complex in terms of the finishing, but still nicely done and very clean. I know not everyone's probably going to be a big fan of the kind of side billboarding there, but it looks much worse here in the bad condition, but here in the kind of the cleaner condition with the black finish, it does look, I think it looks kind of cool, and I think it does tie in with the theme of the watch. It's not like it's some minimalist design and then bam, there's a bunch of billboarding. I think it's a pretty, I guess I wouldn't call it busy, because I feel like that's kind of more of a negative connotation, but it's a piece that has a lot going on. And I think at this angle, you can see it just kind of ties into that. It has a very sporty, modern aesthetic, and it doesn't feel necessarily out of place to have the model name right there on the side of the case. Now, we do have a very nicely done double dome sapphire with inner AR coating. So you can see, of course, with the studio lights, it's going to be catching reflections on the dome. But in general, when you take a look, you do get a really nice, pretty unobstructed view of that dial, which does have a lot of nice things going on in terms of, applied indices and just very sharp application. But one thing that we always have to look for on a dive watch is its bezel action. So these are prototypes. This is really stiff, but quite smooth. Hopefully you guys are getting a good read on that sound, because it is actually a very nice sound. The tactile feedback, a little stiff, but again, I don't know how much of that is attributed to the fact that it is a prototype, pre-production, and how much of that is just by design. It does feel very tight, which is nice to a certain extent, because it does feel quite dialed in. It doesn't feel like there's any gaps or any play. So although, yeah, a little stiff, but honestly, in terms of divers, you're not necessarily going to be always, oh yeah, that's really stiff. So, yeah, with gloves on, it makes it tougher, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's a very clean setup. You can see the ceramic insert there. It is lumed on both accounts. 120 click unidirectional rotating. Nice glossy ceramic finish there. Screw down crowns, signed with no crown guards. And then in terms of that case back and movement, of course, it is nice display back. Here on this particular one, the Type 1, it's the Soprod C140 versus the C115 on the Type 2, which just adds that nice little 24-hour little subdial there that is kind of independently monitored, which is nice, so you can actually just kind of pump that and actually set your time while you're traveling, which I think is pretty cool. Now, as far as the dials and everything go, pretty similar layout, guys. You're going to just be getting really a matte black finish with applied indices, polished hands, Super Luminova BGW9, and up to 200 meters of water resistance. We do also have a 22 millimeter lug width, and then various strap and bracelet options, as you can see here. But with that said, let's go ahead and get this on wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7¼ wrist, this thing wears really nicely. Really clean, obviously very sporty. It does have a little bit of heft to it, but it's negotiated really well on this silicone strap. I would put it on the bracelet, but it's actually not, there's not enough links for it to fit on my 7¼ wrist, at least not really well. It's just would be overly tight and just, you know, I can already hear the sausage wrist remarks if I try to squeeze that thing on. But it does wear really nice, and again, it kind of does remind me of that early Christopher Ward in terms of scale there. And yeah, it's the bracelet is nice and hefty. It's actually connected through pins. I'm assuming pin and collar. I haven't tried to adjust it because, of course, taking out any links would make it even smaller. So, but in terms of the build quality, you know, again, not counting the condition, it is nice and solid, definitely, and it's very hefty and substantial feeling, and really the type of bracelet that I like. Well, you know, obviously would it be nice to have an actual clasp versus the butterfly deployant, but you know, this isn't necessarily just a pure diving tool. And then if you do want to really get into the deep, you have something like this, which works really well. It's not push button, unfortunately. It's friction fit, so you know, you kind of just have to pull it apart and pop it back in together. So you know, not my preference in terms of the way that it secures, but it is quite secure and definitely does the job. So with that said, you can see that it does ride the wrist really well. Contours and lays really quite well on the wrist as well. But let's go ahead, set up some Lume shot, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, BGW9 very cleanly applied, nice blue hue to that, nice and cool. But one thing I like to do is actually get in some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to be in less than optimal lighting conditions. And, you know, whether you're walking underneath an overhang, underneath, you know, the shade of a tree, or just spending time in your favorite vehicle, it's nice to kind of see how the watch finishes, textures, and colorways really render in, you know, more normal and mixed lighting conditions, even in, you know, a very high contrast lighting, where it's going to really expose any type of you know, more, I guess you could consider kind of defects and imperfections there. You can see, of course, you can look at a lot of the wear and tear now on that bracelet. Very unfortunate, but you can see the brushing is really finely done, and the polishing is still, you know, quite lustrous, even with all of the damage that was sustained on there. And honestly, a lot of that does get washed out with the studio lights, so it is nice to kind of highlight that within these shots. But you can see, even kind of mid transition, it's still quite viewable and quite legible, which I really dig. Look at that. There's just, oh, there's a lot to enjoy. So you can get into the dark, very simple and stark, and then you get to notice, oh, okay, a couple of those other fun details of the subdials, power reserve indicators and whatnot. So very cool from that standpoint. All right, so closing thoughts on the wrist. It wears very much, again, like that kind of early gen Seaward C60 Trident line. So if you like those, then you'll definitely like the way these wear. If you like the aesthetic I'm sure you'll be very happy with the build quality. Of course, these are pre-production, so I imagine the production models are going to be in much better condition because they'll be new. And of course, I'm sure they'll do little tweaks and whatnot to modify that. So definitely check the links in the description for kind of the latest and greatest when it terms in terms of pricing, availability, and whatnot, and their whole release schedule. So as far as comparable models go, the $800 to $1,000 diver space is very competitive, really even Swiss made or not. You know, when you start considering some of the higher end micro brands that are out there, and even Seiko. But for me, I think the movement choices here what really set this apart from the crowd. Those are really interesting movements, really beautifully finished and very capable. And yeah, they're just kind of rare within the space. So I think that's something. So if you're really into this movement and you want to find it in something that's very different, and you know, and again, you're looking for something that's different, I think these could be that. You know, bottom line for me, these are really more than just kind of solid first efforts. I think they really offer a more unique option to your traditional Swiss made diver at this price point. And really, I'm looking forward to seeing what NOTSAG as a brand release next, because this is a really cool first offering. If I was able to come out with a line of divers and dedicate them to my son, that'd be really cool. So I think this is a really special timepiece. I wish that I was able to kind of present it in a better light. And hopefully I'm in the future, when these hit production, I'll be able to kind of do a follow-up review. So big shout out to the brand for reaching out, and I'm happy we were able to finally get this video released for them. So with that said, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you haven't, please do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.